All right, to discuss, let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. He's a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer. He's also currently the president of KIP. That's a strategic risk management firm. And Michael Duran, former National Security Council director under President George W. Bush and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. All right,
thank you, Michelle.
Michael, let's start with you. Russia is being very vocal in its support for Tehran lately. As we mentioned at that security conference in Jerusalem where John Bolton was attending, a top Russian advisor was stressing that Tehran is a Russian ally and a partner. And then today we heard from a Russian Foreign Ministry special envoy saying that Iran will not be alone if the United States decides to launch a military strike. At the same time, we heard Lavrov calling for renewed talks and negotiations. Michael, what do you make of Russia weighing in on this so heavily?
I think what the Russians are trying to do is work to bring the two sides to the table in order to save the JCPOA and in order to save the nuclear programs that are threatened by the sanctions actions of the United States. So they're basically supporting the Iranians against the United States, but hoping for a negotiated settlement in which they can mediate.
All right. Hal, the president says he doesn't want a war with Iran, but should one happen, that it would not involve ground troops. Hal, what would a potential military confrontation with Iran look like?
Well, it would be pretty fierce. That's a very tight little waterway. They have the Straits of Hormuz. It's not just the size of the straits you see on the map. It's the waterways themselves, the navigable part. Some of it is very shallow drafts, so it's very difficult to move big ships in and out of there. There's parts of it where they're literally the channel they have to work through is about 1.5 miles wide, so it gets very narrow. They've got anti-ship missile batteries in the mountains all around that area. They've got a lot of naval ships. They've got submarines in that area, not to mention aircraft. So what you're going to see is a very fierce fight back and forth, taking out ships on the water, underwater, taking out aircraft, and trying to take out those batteries. And when the president says no boots on the ground, I think what he's really saying is we're not looking at a big ground invasion. There are places where I could see special operations forces actually going in there to ensure that, batteries or places where they fire ship-to-ship or anti-ship missiles would have to be taken out. Sometimes you do have to actually have boots on the ground for a short period of time just to make sure you took out the weapon system.
Michael, do you see a military conflict erupting at the rate we're going, or do you foresee some other kind of a resolution to this?
I think that we can't rule out a military conflict. I think that the Iranians are going to continue the kind of operations that we've seen, the sabotage operations, and the downing of drones, attacking pipelines and things like that. I think the chance of it getting to a full-blown conflict of the kind that Colonel Kempfer just described is going to be small. I wouldn't rule it out. It's absolutely possible things could escalate and get there. But on both sides, I think there isn't a desire for all-out war. Donald Trump wants to go into the election in 2020 saying that he brought peace and prosperity to the United States. And Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, he fears losing the toppling of the regime. So before it goes to all-out conflict, I think we'll have more of limited conflict of the kind that we've seen. And then possibly, if it got worse, a kind of limited conflict like we had of a larger nature that we had during the tanker war in the Reagan administration.
Michael, the president, as we know, opted not to retaliate against the downing of the U.S. drone with any kind of military action. Reportedly, there was a very successful cyber attack on some Iranian facilities and, of course, the hard-hitting sanctions aimed directly at the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Do you see that as being the right response, especially considering that Iran wants to stop this economic pain, and that's why it's lashing out, if you will, with these other aggressive actions?
I think it was very wise of the president not to attack, not to retaliate for that drone strike, because what the Iranians are trying to do is put pressure on the United States at the G20, which is taking place this weekend in Osaka. What they want is to present to the world, and particularly to the European leaders and to the Japanese, a choice between chaos, disruption of economic markets, and war in the Middle East, a choice between that on the one hand and stability represented by a return of the United States to the nuclear deal. So they want those leaders to swarm Donald Trump and tell him.
Michael, we know that's very unlikely to happen. I'll go out on a limb and say that that's not going to happen. I mean, do you see any scenario where the Europeans put enough pressure on the Trump administration that the president now goes, okay, all right, we're going to back off some of these economic sanctions? I mean, what's the likelihood of that?
No, I do see a scenario. It's not the economic sanctions that they want changed right now. They want the waivers that that Mike Pompeo revoked at the beginning of May for the export of uranium to Russia and heavy water to Oman. They want those returned, and they want a promise from Donald Trump that he won't revoke the other 7 waivers that permit international partners to work with the Iranians on their nuclear program. What they're afraid of is that the Americans are going to take the international cooperation that the JCPOA made possible on their nuclear program off the table. They're going to take it away from them. And that's why they're putting the pressure on them right now. The Iranians are putting the pressure on the Americans now.
Hal, we got 20 seconds. Final thoughts on this.
Final thoughts are, I think that the maximum pressure campaign is causing tremendous stress on the regime, and it may eventually force them to come to the table in some way, shape.
All right. Appreciate your analysis and perspective. As always, very interesting conversation. Hal Kempfer, Michael Duran, thank you.